What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another Boosted Films video. So what we're going to talk about here is steps to getting your transmission ready to be shipped out if you were going to get it sent out to get it rebuilt or anything like that. Just things that you would remove from your transmission in disassembly. And then on the flip side of that, we're also going to talk about what you would do once you have your transmission back after it's been rebuilt or gone through, and just putting it back together, getting things prepped and ready to go before you would actually install it. So of course, if you're just looking for an install video, you're in luck. You can check my channel for that. But this one you should probably watch as well, because it's going to be about preparation, basically getting your clutch fork in place, getting your throw-out bearing in place, and just having it ready to go before you raise it up. And when it comes to some stuff like this, I'm well aware that people might prefer to use different things, use different grease, have their own preferences about what they do. This is kind of how I know to do it. If you have a different preference, if you prefer to use anti-seize, if you prefer to use a certain type of grease, stuff like that, that's up to you. You can do more research on that. This is really just kind of showing how I kind of got my transmission ready to go. And I touch on this in the voiceover as well, but I mean, if you have any comments, suggestions, if I did something wrong, check the comments description. Let's just try to keep these videos kind of as an area where we can all talk about what we did, be it right or wrong, or be it like exactly, the way you wanted to do it versus the way someone else did it. Obviously, I don't want to show anything wrong if I did it wrong, but I can't really update this video very easily. So that's why, I mean, I'm just doing this as I go, and if I did something wrong, I would certainly update in the video description, and otherwise look for the comment section and see if someone said something in there that, that corrects whatever I might have, not done perfectly. So just kind of giving that forewarning out there, really just kind of rambling on here. So without further ado, we'll just jump into the video. So once we have our transmission out of the car, we're going to remove this second piece of this transmission mount that mounts closest to the firewall. So there are 3 bolts holding this piece of the mount on, and we just want to take that piece off and set it aside for later for a reinstall. Next, we're going to look at our clutch fork and throw-out bearing, and we're going to remove some pieces in here. So what I'm going to do here is release the springs that kind of hold that clutch fork in place. I just used a big screwdriver and push them up or down. And after that, there's a 10mm bolt that you're going to want to loosen up that holds this kind of rod in place, so that holds the clutch fork. So that rod's going to slide up, and we're going to pull it up here. But then there's kind of a little cap in the transmission that keeps dirt from getting in, but you can pound this cap through and out of place, and then you should be able to pull that rod out the rest of the way. And this is always something where I recommend possibly taking some photos so you can see exactly how it goes back together, because if you're sending your transmission out to get rebuilt, it could be months later when you're trying to put this back together. So it's always good to have something to reference. And now I'm just disassembling the rest of the pieces here, taking a look at our throw-out bearing, making sure everything looks okay. This was a brand new OEM throw-out bearing that probably only has about 3,000 miles on it, so I will be reusing it. And a lot of people highly recommend using OEM throw-out bearings. They are about $100, but most people say it's worth it over any other throw-out bearing. And next, I'm just going to remove this little breather tube. And if you haven't already, remove your speed sensor. I actually removed my speed sensor while the transmission was in the car. I didn't have to do it then. I could have waited, but remove your speed sensor as well if you haven't. And then once you've done that, everything should be ready for you to pretty much ship out your transmission if you are shipping it out or sending it somewhere for a rebuild. So hopefully only a couple weeks later you have your transmission back. And once I had my transmission back, I started putting things back in. So the first thing I did was put this breather tube back in place. And there's also this other little cap breather tube type thing that goes where the shifter linkage is. So I put that back in place as well. Now I'm just going to bolt my speed sensor in. It will be a lot easier to do this while the transmission's out of the car. You could do it later, but now is a good time just to push it in place and then put in that 1 bolt, since it's easier to access. And then you should just be able to kind of keep that wiring harness out of the way when you install your transmission. So here are the components we're going to put back in. As you can see, we cleaned them up a bit and got them ready to reinstall. And then I'm just going to give the transmission one last spray with brake clean and wipe it down a little bit. And just to let everyone know, I used high temp grease for basically all the components here where I wanted to grease things up. I've heard some people use anti-seize. High temp grease isn't necessarily the only thing that you need to use, but just letting you know, I use the high temp grease for this. If other people have reasons why they didn't or don't want to, let me know in the comments section. Check out the comments if you want to see what other people maybe did instead. So here's our throw-up bearing. We're just going to make sure that that is in good working order, and then we're going to put a little grease on the part where the throw-up bearing slides in on the shaft. One thing you're going to want to do though is you want to make sure you avoid getting any grease kind of on that front side of the throw-up bearing where the throw-up bearing is going to push in to the collar or the wedge collar. You don't want any grease to get on that wedge collar during installation. So here's our clutch fork. We're going to put a little grease here where the rod from the slave cylinder is going to push in. You don't have to do that now. You could do it later as well, but I just did it now so I wouldn't forget. And then I put a little grease where that rod is going to slide through. And I also put a little grease on the contact points where this clutch fork will touch the throw-up bearing. And once we've got that grease applied, we should be able to just kind of set that clutch fork in place. So once we have that clutch fork in place, we should be able to slide in our clutch fork shaft, that rod I was talking about earlier. And we're going to slide that through just a little bit, and we're going to have to install that spring as well as our shaft seal. So we're going to hold that spring in place and let that shaft slide through a little bit, and then it's going to slide through that seal a little bit as well. And obviously we're going to have to do this on both sides. And there is a certain way that those springs have to go on, but you can see that that part of the spring that's pointed up a little bit, and that longer arm of the spring that's going to go around the clutch fork, you can see that is actually kind of closer to the clutch fork. And we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. We'll put that shaft seal in place, and then we'll put that spring in place as well. You can see the way I positioned it to slide it through. And we'll just slide that fork shaft through until that bolt hole lines up. And that's just a 10mm bolt, so you want to tighten up that bolt in place. And next we're going to want to put those springs in place. You might be able to do this just by hand. I found it helped to kind of use my hand and then also use a screwdriver to kind of push them back a bit. For the top one, I just used a screwdriver. On the bottom spring, I used my hand and a screwdriver to kind of push it in place. And that's most of it. You should be able to test it out, make sure it moves in and out smoothly like it should. So again, clean up any excess grease that might be shown in the front side there. You don't want to get any of that grease on your wedge collar during install. So next we're going to be able to pound that kind of plug back in place. So a lot like when we pushed it out, we're just going to use a 10mm socket and tap it in place. And we're going to put our protective boot cover back on around our clutch fork as well. There is a little kind of indent or tab, I guess, in that clutch fork boot cover that should go on one side. It should make sense when you look at the clutch fork and look at that boot. And next we're going to use a chain and hook it on this little hook area that's by the shifter linkage and push our transmission in place so we can get ready for the install. And the install video is most likely already done, so if you're looking to move on to the next step to the install video, go ahead and check out my channel. And just a reminder, I'm a lot like you, just working on this in my garage, learning as I go. So if there are any big updates, it is hard for me to update in the video itself. So check the video description. Otherwise, check the comment section, leave your own comments. Hopefully people that have done this before and can add some insight about tips or tricks will leave comments as well. So that's about it. As always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks for watching.